So I am going to hand over to Nitin Mehra from GFTN, who's kindly agreed to chair this session. So Nitin has a lot of background in this area and a lot of passion in it, so I'm expecting a really lively session. No pressure, Nitin. So over to you.
Thanks, Neil. Good morning, everyone. So yesterday's day was full of optimism. We talked about innovation, technology, data, financial inclusion, sustainability. But today, Neil has given me a tough job. Thanks, Neil, to kind of have some hard conversation, tough conversation on things, for lack of a better word, not as sugar-coated. So while we were discussing yesterday about the progress that has been fueled by the digital innovation, somewhere, someplace, somebody was getting scammed, their identity was stolen, they were hacked, their credit score was hijacked. And it is becoming a reality as we see. And for today, you don't need a malware or even a code to scam someone, right? It could just be an unsolicited message, a spoofed website link, and some misplaced trust, and bam. And it was becoming an increasingly a reality. And to quote Professor Murugasan from yesterday, it will take AI to fight AI. And this session is co-curated along with BIA by GFTN, Global Finance and Technology Network, an initiative by MAS, which brings together financial services leaders, technology leaders, policymakers, to have conversations on creating more inclusive and resilient financial ecosystems. So today, to cover the ground and to really go deep, we have a very decorated panel bringing out really diverse perspectives. So we have Meng from Forrester, who's going to showcase some trends, some reports from Forrester Research that covers the aspect of how AI is impacting fraud detection, how it's scaling up. We have Davina from TransUnion, who brings expertise on identity and risk, specifically in growth markets. And of course, we have Jaco, who brings a broader perspective on cybersecurity and resilience from cyber threats from a more enterprise and government level. And he brings expertise on not just financial services, but all sectors. So it's going to be a really interesting session. But I'll ask, before we jump into the panel, we'll request Meng to just take us through some of the research that Forrester has produced, and then we can go into the panel session. So over to you, Meng.
Thank you, Nitin. Morning, everyone. Let me
give the slides, please.
Great. So, yeah, very nice to be here. And actually, this week is my first time to KL. And to be honest, I don't like KL, but I love it. The food was awesome. The night market was also awesome. The skylines, the Twin Towers, but most importantly, the people here are just awesome. Very warm, very friendly, and also, more importantly, I can feel the energy, the strong energy in KL. So over the last couple of days, I spoke with many industry peers, and also spoke with many very senior executives from the leading financial institutions in Malaysia and in KL. And we discussed a lot about, for instance, the topics about fraud management, about AI, about fintech innovations. So I can feel the very energetic and also very positive, actually a little bit aggressive, adoption of new technologies. For instance, like using more AI among those leading financial institutions. So today, I just want to share more about, what Forrester, as a research institution, we have, conducted in the last few years about fraud management. Share some of the latest trends and also some of the best practices from the industry. Hopefully, it can give you some new ideas. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a senior analyst at Forrester Research. I'm based in Singapore. I serve the clients globally. So I've been with Forrester for about 7 years, and I mainly cover the research area for fraud management, financial compliance, and also some fintech topics. Before Forrester, I also worked in the FSI industry as a practitioner, both for traditional banks and also for fintech software company. So as some of you may have heard of, Forrester is very famous for making predictions. But we are not making predictions for the next 10 or 5 years. We are making predictions for the next year. So this is actually the prediction we made late last year. The prediction is the advanced AI, for instance, Gen AI or agentic AI-based scam and fraud incidents will grow at least 20% in 2025. So half year passed. We are in June this year, and the prediction already came true because we already see a significant jump of, for instance, deepfake scams, a lot of social engineering based on AIs. A lot of companies, individuals became victims of those scams and fraud. For instance, here, just a very high-profile deepfake scam last year came to the head news. A multinational company in Hong Kong lost $25 million because a finance worker was tricked into transferring the money to the scammer's account via a deepfake video call. So the scammers actually was impersonating as a CFO from the head office of this multinational company. And the techniques the fraudsters are using is deepfake. And earlier this year, we also see the similar case in Malaysia. I think if you are from the banking and FSI industry, you definitely know one of the major banks are also targeted by scams, and their CFO are also doing the similar things, just like the Hong Kong company. They were transferring like $1 million, via a deepfake Zoom video call. We are not going to see any decrease of those type of deepfake-based scams or very advanced AI-based scams anytime soon. In the opposite, we will see the rapid increase of all those, very sophisticated AI-based scams. So how do we gonna to fight against those scams, those fraud? So one of the very good approach, and also the most powerful approach, is to take AI to, fight AI with AI. We know the scammers are leveraging AI technologies, but on the defense side, we are also needing to using AI more aggressively. For instance, in the case of deepfake scam, what we can do is we can also use Gen AI to create more deepfake images, videos, all those data, because Gen AI can help us create those data very efficiently. And then we can use two competing models. In the technology domain, we called it Generated Adversarial Networks, or GAN, G-A-N. Basically, there are two neural networks, machine learning models. One of the models is focusing on generating, very good quality, look like authentic deepfake images or videos. The other model is focusing on verifying and validating the quality of those deepfake data and images. And these two models are competing with each other. And then by doing this process, one model is creating images, the other model is validating the videos and images. The organization can create ever better deepfake images or videos. And they can also feed those deepfake data into their AI-based risk scoring models. So whenever next time, when they are going to be attacked by a deepfake, then the AI models can potentially identify those suspicious activity even before it happens. So that's the way to, one of the ways to fight AI with AI. So what are the other approaches we can take? So this is actually a quite interesting study we have just finished this year. So we actually have done very in-depth interviews with the chief risk officer, also CISOs, across the major banks in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. So this heat map shared how those banks, how those leading banks in the region, they are actually using AI in the fraud management and financial crime compliance, like anti-money laundering space. So as you can see here, we have mapped different type of AI technologies, for instance, generative AI, natural language processing, knowledge graph, so on and so forth. We mapped those different AI technology against different fraud management use cases and AML use cases. So the red color and orange color actually means a higher adoption, more maturity adoption of AI. The blue color and green color means less maturity. Less banks and FSI are adopting AI for these specific fraud management use cases. So what does it mean by, what banks can do, what FSI can do by using this heat map? They can know what are the use cases they can adopt AI first. They can generate more quick wins or immediate outcome first, because those colored in red area are those areas we already see some banks have been using AI. They already achieved certain outcomes. So that is a safer choice. You can test with AI more confidently. For instance, here you can see many banks already have been leveraging explainable AI. So what that means by explainable AI is actually a different type of AI technology that can make the AI decisions easier to explain. For instance, some of the AI algorithms, like neural networks, is hard to explain. It's like a black box. But explainable AI is to complement those neural networks, black box type of AI, with some easy to explain AI algorithms like decision trees. So that's very essential for the FSI financial services industry, because you need to, explain to your regulators, explain to your clients why the AI is making these decisions. What is the logic behind? And also quite interesting, we see Gen AI has been tested and also used by some innovative banks in the region. So next slide, I will share how these banks are using Gen AI in fraud management. So the first very interesting use case of Gen AI in fraud management is large transaction model. So what do we mean by large transaction model? Is we can use Gen AI to create more synthetic transactional data. And we use those data to enrich our AI-based risk management models. One of the very big challenges for many banks is they are lacking very high quality and high volume of historical data. They also only have their internal data. They cannot, get the other bank's data. So in some of the cases, they are struggling to create a very high-performing AI models because the training data kind of lacking. The beauty of Gen AI is it can help to create synthetic data. The bank does not necessarily need to get the data from external, which is quite difficult. They can just leverage their historical data, but use Gen AI to create some synthetic data which can complement those historical data and enrich their training sample. So their AI models can be more powerful, can be more accurate. The false positive rate of their AI-based risk scoring models can be much lower. Some banks, some global banks already are adopting large transaction model. For instance, HSBC is adopting that to improve its AI-based risk scoring model's performance. And another use case I want to highlight here is the Gen AI can also significantly improve our data scientists, our software engineers, AI engineers' productivity and efficiency. Because in the past, and also currently, many banks, their data scientists need to build many AI models or risk management rules from scratch. That's very time-consuming. But we can leverage the power of Gen AI to create some recommended rules or recommended AI models just in a few minutes, so that data scientists or our AI engineers, they can just make some adjustment on top of those AI-generated models. They don't need to build everything from scratch. So this can significantly improve the model building efficiency for many banks. Some banks like Standard Chartered have been leveraging that to improve their data scientist efficiency, especially in the fraud management, financial crime compliance space. And last but not least, I want to introduce another very good technologies, which is behavioral biometrics. So this technology is also based on AI. And the beauty of this behavioral biometric is it can very effectively to fight against scams, social engineering scams, impersonation scam, and authorized push payment fraud. So what do we mean by authorized push payment fraud is the customer themselves, the legitimate customer themselves, are making the payments, making the transfers. They were either manipulated by the fraudsters or they are cheated by the fraudsters to make the transfers. And how the behavior biometric solution work? Actually, here we created a workflow. For instance, if I am a customer, one day I got a call from the scammers. The scammers impersonate as, for instance, official from a tax authority. So he told me that I didn't pay some tax. I need to cooperate with tax authority to, transfer additional tax. Otherwise, my bank account or my, social, the security may be affected. So that I will be, if I'm the legitimate customer, I probably will get very nervous or feel very uncomfortable. Then my behavior will be changed. For instance, the way I hold my phone, the speed I type on the screen will be changed. And the behavior biometric solution can identify any abnormal behavior of the customer. And then the bank, for instance, my bank, will trigger additional authentication. For instance, they can send me a push notification asking me, hey, Meng, did you plan to make the transaction today? Is that something you plan to do? But because I got this call from the scammers, I don't know it's a scammer, unexpectedly, this is something very surprisingly to me. So I probably will click on, no, this is not some planned transaction for today. And then the bank can block this transaction for further investigation. As a consumer, as a legitimate customer, I can also be having more time, to think through whether this is a scam or a legitimate transaction. So that's the approach we also see financial institutions have been increasingly adopting, because you cannot only rely on your customer, they rely on their awareness of all those scam prevention techniques. We also need to have the technology system in place, have the guardrail in place to safeguard our customers. So that's the beauty of behavior biometric solutions. So that's all my sharing today. Hopefully you can get some new thoughts. And let's move into the panel discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you, Meng. That was honestly both very insightful and alarming. I think fight AI with AI is almost becoming like a quote for this conference. Moving on, so let's get into this panel discussion, but I want to shake things up a little, start on putting you all on a spot there. What's one fraud or cybersecurity threat that has been overlooked, or we pretend we've got under control, but honestly we don't, and it's open for all?
I can start. I think what's coming up more and more is not necessarily a fraud trend we don't know exists, but one that's severely underestimated and unidentified in many of our markets. And that's really around synthetic fraud and how much it actually is out there, how it's being written off as, for instance, credit losses, first-party fraud, and how difficult it is to really pick up that it's a synthetic identity that's being loaded onto the system. We're seeing this across all our different countries. It's a growing need. With generative AI, deepfake is becoming increasingly genuine, really. So if you look at some of the stuff we're doing in Hong Kong, we're actually having to work within the industry to really understand how do you pick up a deepfake identity versus a genuine identity. We're seeing how easy it is to scale these attacks, how AI is making it almost fraud as a service. You don't even have to be smart at fraud anymore. You can just buy it. You can create millions of synthetic fraud identities that look real. They often bypass a lot of the automated checks. They know, the fraudsters knows which systems to go into, who to load with, and as soon as they get bust at that one, they know who to go to next, which just goes to how we don't really share fraud across industries, making it even easier for the fraudsters to get through. So I think that, for me, is one of the biggest trends that we really don't have under control yet.
Yeah, just probably to add on to that, my point of view is quite simplistic, and I would like to think pragmatic from that perspective. First of all, I would like Forrester to stop predicting stuff because they come true every year. So Meng, if you can do me a favor and predict that deepfakes is going to go down by 50% next year, then hopefully that will help with a turnaround. Obviously, just joking, but the deepfake cases we've seen makes the Ocean 11 movie sets looks like a walk in the park. It is cool. And the amount of effort and reconnaissance the cyber criminals put in to put these and pull it off needs to be commended, unfortunately, because is the amount of time they spend. They didn't just target any financial analyst or controller in a random company. They knew exactly what the processes were. They knew exactly what the pain points are, what the pressure points are, and they went after it, and it worked. From my perspective, it doesn't matter how much cyber technical controls you have in place, it doesn't matter how many fraud controls you have in place, but if your fundamental business process is not up to date with the technology, with the industry, with the current trends, is the first thing when I read the article on the $25 million transfer was, how is it possible that one person is able to make that, regardless of the deepfake, the convincing stuff? How has one person had the ability to execute that transaction? And that's where, for me, is the integration of business processes into everything else and the continuous improvement of that is probably one of the things we always think we have on control, but we never look at.
Thanks, Yoko. So I think Yoko mentioned a great point on the internal control, because even though, for instance, the deepfake is very genuine, but still, for instance, the multinational company I just discussed, they don't have the guardrail in place internally. Probably only one person or 2 person approve, then the transaction goes out. But usually we need more guardrails. We need, for instance, 3 or 4 people, even 5 people to approve that. Even if, for instance, your boss told you to do so, you still cannot because you need more approval. So the internal guardrails is equally important as the technology we build, the system we build to make the defense more effective.
Thanks, everyone. David, I want to nudge a little bit more on something you said on synthetic identities and how they're becoming increasingly very convincing. Talk to us a little bit about how TransUnion is dealing with the situation, given that the synthetic identities are becoming a reality. So what part TransUnion is playing to combat this?
100%. Yeah, I think the first thing, as I said, is trying to help our customers identify it, understand that there is a problem. So for instance, in South Africa, we've noticed a 153% increase in synthetic fraud over the first 6 months of 2024 compared to the 6 months before that. In Hong Kong, as I mentioned, we've had our customers come to us with identities that have passed through all document authentication and liveness detection. And we're working with the industry, with our customers within the industry to really figure out, well, how do we train our models better? How do we train our products better? How do we add in additional steps into multi-layered fraud detection processes? One of the things that I found really fascinating is we started a study in Canada. They were seeing that especially their newer accounts were starting to get a lot of bad debt on them. So initially the industry was thinking, well, the economy is bad, that's probably it. We're getting growing first-party fraud, that's a big issue in Canada. So we took the data, we did an analysis to try to see what's happening. And one of the things we did was just take it through a couple of models. So we took it through our identity exchange model, we took it through first-party fraud models, and then we took it through synthetic identity models. And what we found was actually that a majority of this bad debt was synthetic identity fraud that had got through the system. And that for us was very interesting. It was a good way to go back to the industry and say, look what you're missing. What can we do as TransUnion to help you improve those upfront processes? Because we can't stop you from giving credit to someone. We can give you all the tools to highlight the risk. But as soon as a synthetic identity gets through and you give credit to them, they're now building up, they're very patient, these fraudsters. They take their time, they build up a profile, they mimic what a new-to-credit customer or a new-to-market customer would look like. And once they get to a certain level, they've now been legitimized, basically, in the credit system, and they can get more and more credit until they get to the stage that they do what we call bust-out fraud. And if we look at our State of Omnichannel report this year, you'll see that in the US alone, we see around 3.3 billion exposure to some of our customers, with 60% of that being in auto. So basically, you're then seeing they're taking out a credit card, they're getting a personal loan, to the extent that their credit is so great they can now go get a car, and then they bust out. And most companies don't then realize that was synthetic identity fraud. They take it through to the bad debts process, they incur additional costs because now they're trying to contact somebody that doesn't exist. And so it really is a growing problem through the whole ecosystem. So for us, it's around how do you educate your customers? Synthetic fraud is there. It's difficult for us to pick it up if we don't have the right processes in place. Making sure that they understand you need a multi-layered fraud check. You need to make sure that you have things that look at what we call an online, offline, and digital identity. Is the individual who they say they are? Does their document look authentic? Does the selfie match the person? Is that person alive? So when you're doing those liveness checks, again, going back to the presentation Advanced AI did on Wednesday, making sure that that individual is who they say they are. They're not using a 2D mask, a 3D mask. They're not fraudulently getting into your system somehow. But then coupling that with things like email risk, phone risk, device risk, where's your geolocation, IP risk, etc. There are so many different elements to an identity. You need to have that multi-layered fraud detection system up front. You need to have things like synthetic identity models or identity scores up front. And then you need to continue throughout the process to ensure this person remains real, right? So that for me is critical. So it's educating, it's making products available, and as I say, trying to stop it before it gets on the bureau and gets legitimized as an identity.
Thanks, Davina. Jaco, so I think it's well established that the generative AI is increasingly being used by the scammers, fraudsters, and anyone who's have evil intent. I want you to come in and talk about more on if you're seeing increasing trend in AI generated phishing scams on a more enterprise and government level, and what are you seeing currently in the market?
Yeah, so there has been a big increase on that, especially on phishing is and has been probably the most traditional tool from a social engineering perspective for any cybercrime. Because at the end of the day, the weakest point in a link is always us, the human being, because we've all fell for it at some point, and to certain degrees, even myself. Even though I'm being put forward as an expert in cybersecurity, I've fallen for it as well. I've fallen for my own company's internal phishing campaign trainings as well, because of a mindset or just on the day you were focused on something else. So now the problem is the emails becoming more sophisticated and more convincing that you are getting, and it's also now with regards to this from a sender perspective as well. So not only are you getting an email that looks very legit from your boss or your manager, it actually sounds, the writing style is the same language nuances, the same, dare I say, especially in Malaysia, for those of you who don't know, like English is also my second language, so there is certain nuances that you bring in, and it actually is being picked up and it's being reproduced from that perspective. So it's really difficult to do that. So now we're running. Now we have to buy a tool for a tool, because now we buy an AI tool to make sure that the phishing emails that come through is legit or not, or help with training from that perspective. So there's a big increase in that. So now I'm not going to spend too much time on deepfakes because we've already seen the elements there. The other part that we don't talk too often about is when we implement AI tools, generated or from any perspective, is what's the safeguards and the guardrails we put in place internally? Are we looking at data poisoning? Are we preventing biases? Are we looking at model impact as well? Because at the end of the day, you using a GenAI model to help you predict fraudulent transactions, what if the attacker has access to your model, to your LLM, and start changing the data in there? So what you get out is very different to what you've intended. And yet again, one of the key things for me is a lot of people are afraid that AI is going to take their jobs, but I think it's the wrong messaging. It's a valid concern, but it's the wrong messaging. Actually, the human at the center is always going to be the key, because at some point, it's like Meng said, there needs to be explanatory details of why an AI made a certain decision. Now, if you're going to get to those points, the recommendation is, as a final check and balance, there needs to be a human to make sure that the validation is done correctly from there. So there's really a lot of elements that's using there, and it is AI to find AI from that perspective, but it is also about stepping back and looking. So I'm from an industrial control system perspective, and one of the biggest engineering controls we normally do is with digitalization is like, step back, can we actually replace a digital component with a mechanical component? Something that is unhackable because there's no internet connection, there's no connectivity to it. And I almost feel it's like a similar situation in the financial fraud perspective, where we need to step back and look, is there, dare I say, a mechanical or a human control that we need to replace something digital with, just to keep the checks and balances in place from that perspective?
No, absolutely. It may seem counterintuitive, but putting the mechanical and human in the loop does safeguard us. Now, Meng, I was going through the reports that Forrester produced, and of course your presentation. I think it's very clear that the generative AI-led synthetic data. How does credit bureaus and banks, financial institutions, fraud scoring companies, how do they deal with this sudden change that is on the onslaught that has happened into this generative AI-led synthetic data and fraud strategies?
Yeah, so I think from my conversations with many, for instance, chief risk officers, CISOs, from many leading banks across the region, I think there's a maturity, difference across different banks. Some banks or some financial institutions, they are more advanced in terms of building their own AI models, but some others may still using some traditional rules-based models. So that's actually the difference. So always, if I spoke with those guys, I always advise them to, build your mechanism, fraud detection mechanism, based on your own maturity. For instance, if you don't use AI yet, definitely you can just start from small. For instance, you can start with some specific fraud use cases. For instance, account opening KYC use case or transaction monitoring use case. You can build some minimum viable product or models from those small areas, and gradually you can roll out to broader fraud management use cases. And then the other recommendation I always do is to, for instance, the financial institution, credit bureaus, banks, fintechs, you cannot do everything in-house, because that's even the largest bank, for instance, the largest banks in Singapore, they also have a lot of false positive or fraud. Because even the very big banks, their in-house capabilities are limited. You cannot have unlimited people, data scientists to do that. So working with the right partners, external partners, is also essential, because some of the tech vendors, they may have a very strong AI capabilities. They can complement, for instance, the bank's internal systems. So always is finding the balance between your in-house team and your external partners is very good approach.
Thanks, Ming. So I'm going to stick on the point that Jaco made on human is the weakest link, and I'll go to Davina to see that now we are seeing this increasing trend of social engineering where I'm the victim, but I'm the one completing the transaction. So it has led whatever the fraudster has led me to do this. So I'm the victim and I'm the one who's completing the transaction. So those traditional red flags are missing, right? How does TransUnion identify and combat with such situations where your conventional your red flags are not there?
Yeah, I think the consumer is the weakest link, right? And I mean, we do every 3 months, we go out to all the a set of consumers across our different markets, and we ask questions around credit and questions around identity protection. And in our latest State of Omnichannel report, we saw that 53% of consumers had fallen victim to some kind of scam. So whether it's by email, phone, whatever the case may be. And that's across 18 different countries that we did it. So it's a consistent messaging. Every single consumer in every single country is facing an increasing amount of scams being sent to them. I mean, from my perspective, if I look at my Gmail account, I probably have 3 or 4 different ones every day. And it can be difficult, right? I've had mails sent from my bank that have the exact same look and feel as my bank. And there'll be something small that I'll pick up. And that's, I've been in the industry now for 15 plus years, that I feel like I'm a lot more aware than somebody else would be. So I'll pick up something small and send it to my bank and say, was this you? Many other people are going to click on that. If I think how many courier scams get sent to me. And most of the world does online shopping, right? I even get my groceries delivered. So you'll often have something, this courier guy can't deliver it because you owe a payment. Now, I know that I'm not going to click on any link, but other people might. I mean, when I get a legitimate link, I don't want to click on it. So what TransUnion really believes in is, how do we educate consumers? How do we get consumers to understand what is credit, why it's important, how identity fraud happens, how being aware of your credit profile is the fastest way to pick up identity fraud. So Maya yesterday spoke about the fact that we have a product called Credit View across most of our markets, and that educates you on credit, your score, what you need to do to become financially included. Coupled with CreditView, in most of our countries, we also have something called True Identity. And that really is something that a customer can subscribe to, and they get things called credit alerts and dark web alerts. Along with that, though, they also get access to a wealth of material on identity protection, and that will be around scams, how to avoid them, what you should look out for, etc. And then they get the dark web alerts to say, your data has been found in the dark web, this is what you should do to protect your accounts, to protect your identity. They get credit alerts if an inquiry is done or something changes on your credit profile. This is what you should do. This is how to protect your identity. And I believe that getting consumers familiar with tools like that will help them that, oh, there's an inquiry on my credit profile and I didn't do it. Go to the credit bureau gets hold of the bank and says, listen, there's potentially identity fraud, an investigation can happen. It limits the loss to the consumer as well as the institution very quickly. Beyond that, we go on a lot of, like we release an omni-channel report twice a year. We release consumer education 4 times a year. And then all of our experts in market will do media interviews, go on the radio, be in newspapers, explaining to consumers what's important. We also then go with our customers and do a lot of industry events to explain to consumers why your identity is important. And I say that we do all this work, but it's not necessarily where it needs to be yet. When I look at, in South Africa, we had a data breach in 2022, and we offered True Identity to all the impacted individuals. And we probably had less than a 1% uptake of people taking that service. Because people just, they either don't understand it or they don't really care. They put the blame on the financial institution when something goes wrong. So I really think there's a long way to go. And there's a lot of things that the financial institution needs to put in place to try stop consumers from pushing the button. But consumer education just has to constantly be invested in.
So if I, in a sense, a lot has to do with consumer education and awareness, which the onus is on the banks, financial institutions, governments perhaps, as well as credit bureaus. So you guys are all responsible as well. Moving on, Jaco, I think you have, seen things across verticals, infrastructure, financial services. Now, instant payment is becoming ubiquitous, right? How do you bring in safe and cybersecurity resilience into systems that were initially not designed for this scale of frauds and scams?
So that's a very good question. And so if I look back in my my true background in control systems, oil refineries and so on. So a lot of those, so I know it's completely off topic for here, but a lot of the oil refinery wasn't built to last 5 years. It was built to last 30 plus years. So a lot of the assets or the plants that is running manufacturing plants, etc., that was built 30 years ago, the aim was to build it to now. Before security was even a topic, let alone a LAN cable to connect something to the internet from that perspective. So it's very similar from there. So it's understanding from a risk perspective is, and really stepping back and look at it, it's like, okay, so this is a legacy system that has never been built to deal with fraud or cybersecurity incidents. It's really about building a layer in defense. It's like in a traditional way of where a king of a land built his castle and then he built layers of defense out of there with all stops and checks and balances from that perspective. And that's a very similar approach. But at the same time also, I think what we have to start doing across all industries from a cyber perspective is actually bringing in the people who do it on a daily basis that knows that system in and out because they're maintaining it, they're working on it, and actually said, if you want to achieve this outcome, this fraudulent transaction, how would you do it? It's like asking engineers in the refinery to go, it's like, if you want to create a big dangerous gas leak, what would you do in the system to achieve that? And actually, you'll be surprised with the answers that comes out from that perspective. Because who knows it better than the people who's maintaining and operating it? So that's one of the elements from there. The second one that I would say is is cybersecurity is, of course, is a cost center. It's not a profit center. And it's about there is not enough investments going into that to actually protect what we want to protect. I think a lot of organizations try to protect too many things, and therefore the budgets get spread. I think there must be a much more targeted approach on real on in-depth protections versus just the baseline of protection. And to be fair, Malaysia, the Malaysia Cyber Act was evoked last year on the 26th of August. And it's finally a push from the government, from the Prime Minister to say enough is enough. Because it wasn't so much about cyber, it was all the fraudulent transactions that's been happening in Malaysia that really pushed that to the forefront. And it's about we are not collectively taking enough accountability to do enough to try to reduce the number of successful cyber attacks and fraudulent transactions from there. So hopefully I'll see that as a big positive step and turning that around. And then just to add to Davina's point about user training, it's like, I don't think there's never enough emphasis on that, because actually there's two rules for me, always that applies. Don't click on links, regardless where you get them from. Secondly is, when in doubt, take your card, especially if it's from a credit card or your bank card, turn it upside down and phone the number on the back of that. Because in Malaysia specifically, all fraudulent scams, I got a call the other day from a mobile phone number claiming to be from Cyber Malaysia, and that my phone number has been used in fraudulent transactions. So they're going to, by 4 o'clock this afternoon, they're going to cut my phone line off. And I was like, okay. And the guy's like, but you understand the significance, your whole business is being run for. I'm like, well, cut it off. Cut my number off. It's like, if it's been used for fraud, I'll get a new number. And just the guy didn't know what to say to me over the phone apart from thank you, and then put the phone down. And surprise, surprise, my number is still running. But it's like Davina said earlier, how many other people didn't fall for that? Small business owners who runs their whole business off the phone is going to lose their phone number and all their contacts from that perspective. And of course, I didn't get to that point. I should have probably stayed on, is what is the incentive to keep it on? How much would it cost to keep your number at the end of the day? So it's about that user education and that user piece that people, I think we should hammer more about on. And final piece, sorry, I'm a bit on a rant now, because my wife was a victim of something very similar to what you said about a courier service, is the fact that I personally, as a consumer, would like to see the bank stop sending me reward schemes over text messages, over emails, over so on. Because it's actually generating a perfect playground for cyber criminals to copy and mimic from that perspective. And so you can't say to me that don't click on links, but then you sent me legitimate links at the same time. So it's a bit of it's a double-edged sword from that perspective.
So, question for you, Meng. I think we've seen with the Hong Kong case, and that for some reason Asia Pacific is becoming the ground zero for a lot of this impersonification, frauds, and deepfakes. We touched upon a bit on the tech, but do you think tech solutions are enough, or we need better policy alignment to deal with this?
Yeah, great question. So definitely, I think tech enablement, for instance, AI is one very effective tool, and also it can help us to prevent certain number of fraud or scams, but that's not enough. For instance, we also discuss about the internal controls and also the guardrails we are building. So those guardrails could be the policies, for instance, identity and access management policies we build in our organization. For instance, only those people, they have the privileged access to, for instance, the bank account or something. So that could be very helpful. And also from a consumer side, definitely, I know most of the banks in the region are doing a lot of education. For instance, I receive the email from my multiple banks every day on, for instance, what is the ways to mitigate scams. So the banks will send millions of billions of emails every day. So that's good, because that can at least improve the awareness of the consumers on fraud and scam techniques. So I think the best way is always building the technology. That's essential, but also don't forget to build the guardrails in your internal organization, and also to educate the consumers in a very frequent base. Definitely that would make our life easier. And one last point I think is becoming more important is in the past, I think cybersecurity is more like a reactive approach. For instance, you are hacked and then you build a system, you respond to the incidents. But now it's increasingly become a more proactive approach. So in terms of the fraud and scam, the other very effective way is to know what are those criminals are, what are those fraud rings, where are they located, what are the techniques they are using. So I think increasingly there is a higher demand for those threat intelligence. We need to know the fraudsters, their techniques, their incentives, their locations. So that can also help us to mitigate those risks more proactively instead of reactive.
Thanks, Mike. So, Naveen, I'll come back to you. Your remit covers a lot of growth markets. I wanted to talk about how TransUnion is dealing with scenarios where in some of the countries, geographies where the traditional credit data is less thin, but the fraud risk is disproportionately high. So what's TransUnion doing in those geographies for identity fraud detection and management?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two things. In certain markets, you have a golden source, right? So in South Africa, we have our Home Affairs data. Everybody has an identity, your biometrics are captured, and you can do a live call to them to kind of check on somebody's identity. The details have been provided correctly, name, surname, everything matches. In other countries, and first world countries, your best economies even, you don't necessarily have a golden source, which makes synthetic identity a lot easier to do. So we kind of say identity verification at its core is the first step, right? You're going to do a check against the Bureau for what data we have. How many suppliers have sent through that same data versus that data being linked to other pieces of information. So for instance, if someone's using my name, surname, and ID, but they've put it against their phone number, their email, their address. That's something you can easily pick up if it's coming through and it doesn't match information that sits on the credit bureau. But then there's additional checks, and as I said, you've always got to have this multi-layered strategy. You want to not have too much friction for your customer, and some customers will drop off right there at the front. You can verify them very quickly through an identity verification solution. But you should always be coupling that with things like device risk, things like, have we seen this email before? How new does it seem? How risky is it? What's the velocity of the same information coming in? Is this information connected to other individuals? Is there any fraud indicators against individuals that have this information connected to them? A recent post from our UK office was a study they did where they took demographic information and ran it to see if people are connected via that information to others. And like they say, if you've got a phone number and it's connected to one or two other people, it's probably legitimate, right? My husband might use it, my child might use it. But when it's connected to 70 other people, it's potentially not as legitimate anymore unless you've really got a lot of kids. So it's around understanding each element of an identity. And an identity is not just your name, surname, and identity number. It's every single piece of information that comes on an application, and whether that can be connected directly or indirectly to somebody with a higher risk indicator. And so that's what we do. We've got holistic platforms. We have consortium data, fraud feedback data across every data element on an individual. And then we've got tools that can link every one of those data nodes together. And then obviously on top of that, it's the advanced analytics, right? So making sure that you have models using neural networks to constantly be learning about, okay, we're seeing more data coming in, but we're seeing an increasing trend that we didn't see before that is now indicating this could be a fraudulent transaction. Because fraudsters are smart, right? They're adapting faster than we ever can. So you have to have the right tools that are adapting your product and learning on the go. And as Meng said, using AI to fight AI, your models need to be trained constantly.
Absolutely. Jaco, one question for you. So we always kind of put these big tech companies as, we slam them for holding a lot of data on a lot of us. But even banks, large financial institutions, they hold everything from transaction metadata to biometric logs, which they can then support into their credit risk model. So there's a lot of data. What's still missing? What are we missing? What are they missing?
That's a very good question, and I've been thinking about that, and I can give a whole raft of answers. But to be fair, it's like at the end of the day, it comes down for me in a very simplistic manner of it needs to be top down. If there's no accountability right at the top, and also or the senior leaders taking it seriously, it's I got a saying if it's not my boss's priority, it's not my priority at the end of the day. And if data protection and cybersecurity or any other related topic is not on top of the agenda and being driven from the top down, it won't happen. And unfortunately, I think over the last how many years, we've chased the benefits and the efficiencies of digitalization, for example, without actually stepping back and looking at the ownership that comes with that. Because every time we adopt something digitally, you create a ownership or accountability debt at the end of the day that's internal. And it's understanding where that data is and how does that get how are you going to process that, how are you going to use that, but more importantly, how are you going to protect it from that perspective. So for me, it's the top down. The other one from an identity perspective that I've come across lately, and it's really interesting for me, is to move away from, of course, your username, your password, your multi-factor authentication, and so I'm not necessarily moving away, but put another layer of in there. Nowadays, organizations are using AI, building solutions to do behavioral-based identity authentication. And I actually think from a financial perspective is bringing the authentication even down to the device level of capturing the device data, not just the phone number, because I've been told by my own, not to name names, but my own bank, that my transactional authentication is bounded by my device. No, it's not. It's bounded by my phone number. And phone numbers can be spoofed. Until we bring it down to the level of device level and behavioral-based authentication, we're always going to have an uphill battle with regards to authenticating that identities are actually real, consistent, and it's existent.
Meng, I'll come back to you, and this is a question very pertinent for this room. I think in the reports, and you briefly mentioned in your presentation as well, that consortium-based data sharing and joint fraud intelligence is the way to go. But what's really stopping us to achieve this vision? And what do you think, what will be a real breakthrough to do it?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the biggest challenges when I spoke with many financial institutions about data sharing, building those consortium. For instance, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, we already saw those government-initiated data consortium for fraud detection and also for financial crime compliance, anti-money laundering. But the reality is most of those consortium are moving quite slowly. The banks, they don't want to share data with the peers because they see the data as their key assets, their, the competitive advantage. So no banks, no financial institution want to share anything with their peers, competitors. So that's the biggest barrier. So I think one of the good approach is the government initiation definitely is one of the very good approach because that can, the regulator request the bank to participate. So no one can say no, but it's not a real, the root solution for this. The root solution definitely would be on the technology side. The banks don't necessarily need to share any raw data, any sensitive information. They can share the data without sharing the raw data. So that's actually will need to be enabled by technologies. For instance, some encryption technologies like multi-party computation, TE environment, and also like zero knowledge trust. So those new technology, privacy and security preserving technology could be very helpful for financial institutions to eventually build this data consortium. They can be more confident, more comfortable, share the insights without sharing the raw data, without leakage their key assets, which is their customer data.
Yeah, thanks, Meng. I think we are coming to close of the session. Before we go into the audience Q&A, I just wanted to close on a hopeful note because we started the morning with the trade wars, and now it's turning out to be a very depressing morning, and we want to flip it. I'm very hopeful that we'll win this war, against the fraudsters. But what's making you hopeful? What is that one innovation, one mind shift, one cross-sector collaboration that you can think of that will help us win? This is for everyone. Yeah, just feel free to go.
Yeah, I think, it goes back to the last question, right? I think we need to stop looking for fraud in our own backyards. We're not going to win that way. Fraudsters don't do it that way, right? They're not limited by regulations. They're not limited by privacy or consumer rights concerns. Fraudsters work together globally all the time. And that's why they're constantly getting ahead of us. We need to start adopting that mindset that if we don't fight fraud as an industry, cross industries, across the globe, the fraudsters will always be a step ahead. So what's hopeful for me is we're having a lot more of those conversations. In pretty much every one of our markets, there are at least one or more industries looking to collaborate and create consortium data sets that can be used to help identify fraud. As Meng said, it's very challenging, right? Everybody wants to be part of a consortium, but they don't want to give you any data. so it is a challenge, but I think once we start getting that movement right and we're proving the models across how our analytics on top of the data can start significantly changing the fraud game, we'll get more and more buy-in. So starting with smaller industries is probably the way to go. And we're seeing big issues across things like gaming, for instance. Gaming has a big issue, insurance has a big issue. They're much more willing to do consortium and feedback data than financial services. So I think we're seeing the right movement. We're having the right industry conversations. Industry bodies are pushing fraud feedback and consortium data. And it's around having the right independent third party helping that and getting rid of the concerns around competitor insight and really starting to partner with each other around how we fight fraud.
Jakob?
So my thoughts are very, very, very similar to Davina's. It is fraudsters, cybercriminals, hackers, hacktivists, whichever the motivation is, there's no boundaries. So we need to stop putting boundaries around ourselves, especially around sharing. Because they go through, do anything and anything to achieve their objective, and what we're doing is we're hamstringing ourselves by not doing that. Now, if we just, as an example, if we're going to build generative AI tools to help us combat fraud or cybercrime and so on, we should share the data for the learning models from there and normalize the data and share the data, because at the end of the day, that's the only way these tools are going to be able to be trained consistently and effectively and grow and become more efficient to help us fight it.
What makes you hopeful, Meng?
Yeah, so great point, Davina and Jakob. So my point is actually the collaboration not stop from industry collaboration from your peers, but also need to involve the countries and regulators, because fraudsters, they are global organizations. They are working groups across the globe. But I think on the defense side, we don't have those country elaborations. For instance, some states may be more conservative of sharing any like fraud-related data or any blacklist information, financial crime or threats information. So that actually create a lot of barriers, especially in the APAC. We have many countries in the region, a lot of different government, different approach. So I think definitely there also will be require cross-country collaboration of sharing those financial crime data. So that's actually can be a make it more effective for building those data sharing consortium, not only sharing data domestically, but also cross-border as well.
So thank you everyone. So I was actually, about to give like a little plug-in of GFTN, but you guys did a sales pitch on my behalf. So it's pretty apparent that cross-sector collaboration, cross-country collaboration, policy alignment will be the mainstay if you want to fight this. And that's what the intent was from the MAS when they was created Global Finance and Technology Network. That's pretty much we do. We bring together policymakers, financial services, technology to create a more resilient financial systems. And I think my colleague spoke about it yesterday. We will be in Joburg in September, along with the G20 presidency for the SME Finance Forum, where we'll be dealing with some of these topics regarding more on the SME side. But we'll cover more of these topics more broadly in all of our forums, including the Singapore FinTech Festival. With that, I think we're right on time. We can close the session. Before we go into the audience, I really want to thank all three of you for bringing such really precision points from cross-sector, cross-industries, from your experiences. This has been a great chat. Thank you so much. We'll take a few questions from the audience. We have about less than a minute, so maybe we can do maximum 2. So, yeah.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Congratulations to the panelists. I am from Brazil, and the Central Bank of Brazil ended up creating a resolution that a consortium that various, sectors were able to share data in way to prevent fraud. I was wondering if we have any similar initiatives here in Asia that you could share with us.
I can talk a little bit about Singapore. So in Singapore, we have the COSMIC, which is an anti-money laundering data sharing consortium. So it's this consortium come into effect, I think late last year. And then I think currently there are 6 major banks participating in this COSMIC consortium. So as we discussed, it's actually moving a bit slower than we expected, but actually it's still making some progress. So I think that's an example of building those government-initiated data sharing consortiums specifically focused on financial crime compliance. So there are a lot of challenges, but I think it's still optimistic to making more progress.
Yeah, we also, from our perspective, we're working across the Philippines and Hong Kong and working with the financial services sector to really understand how we can create those independent third-party databases for them. There are some systems that exist in the different countries, and we've got them across the UK, South Africa, where you've got more industry-specific fraud databases. Some of the concerns we've had where customers are coming to us is because they're limited to the data that's being given into the system, and it's difficult to enrich that data, ensure the data quality is good, match the data to potential other fraudsters. So that's really where we're looking at working with industries to see if we get fraud data, how can we enrich it, how can we link it, how can we ensure that if a synthetic identity hits and then they take that same identity or swap a couple of things. So for instance, they'll swap the name and the surname, but keep the photo the same. Then how do we identify that across a different customer? So those are conversations that we're doing also in Hong Kong and Philippines and some of our other regions in order to see how we set up the best multi-industry, multi-region consortium datas.
Thank you.
I think we're coming to close. I just want to thank once again to our speakers for really bringing this sharp and unfiltered perspective. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a huge round of applause?
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, Ming. Thank you, Davina. Thank you, Jaco, for a great panel. I've got a favor to ask of you all. Can you get a cup of coffee and refresh and be back in 15 minutes? That wasn't a very good response, was it? Oh dear. Can you? Thank you. We've running a little bit tight on time, so 15 minutes back, please, for the next panel, and look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.